Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. Today we are going to talk about a book called The Well-Dressed Ape, and the subtitle, The Natural History of Myself. The author is Hannah Holmes, the publisher is Random House, and Hannah's on the way to the airport, but she's stopped by. Thanks for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
You know, you raise a question in the introduction, or not a question, you actually make a statement that no such book has been written before, which I found strange. No book that gives us a biological fact sheet of Homo sapiens, the number of legs, the teeth, the preferences, habits of reproduction, and so on. I find that passing strange, don't you?
I do, which is why I needed to rectify the situation.
Well, you're the perfect one to do it, if I look at your background. You're a gifted science journalist, the author of a book called Suburban Safari and a book called The Secret Life of Dust. Incredible things. And you're called a witty environmentalist. That's good for this task. And I think even more important than all of that is your father, P.K. Holmes, was a biologist, you say, in the largest sense of the word.
Yeah. I grew up in a household full of bios, living things of all descriptions. You know, a few humans, but also pigs and cows and chickens, and then whatever got orphaned on the road or fell out of somebody's attic. So we had bats and rats and cats and chickadees and robins.
In one bedroom with all of them critters at one time was also a flying squirrel.
Yeah.
Whom you describe affectionately as the animal with the smoothest fur I've ever encountered. A flying squirrel?
A flying squirrel. Somebody had opened a birdhouse attached to their house, and out fell a family of baby flying squirrels. And as everything else that was orphaned in the neighborhood, they all ended up at our house. And one of them stayed with us for a long time, for years. And, I happen to have patted a lot of animals at this point in my life. And that thing had fur so soft you could almost not feel it.
Oh, my.
It was so soft.
Oh, my. And it was nocturnal.
It was nocturnal, and he would get crazy at the end of the day. And my parents would let him out, and he'd go scampering across the floor at top speed. He'd run up the wall as far as he could, and then kick off and glide back down across the room and
my gosh.
turn around and do it over again.
That's exciting. Did you charge? you could have had a show there, I think. It would have been wonderful.
But in the daytime, when he was asleep, you would pick him up and carry him around, and he'd always want to crawl down the neck of your T-shirt and snuggle up where your shirt tucked into your jeans. You know, we were little kids. And so we'd carry him around to sleep down there.
Well, all that said, it comes as no surprise to me that the book starts with you in front of a mirror, surveying the scene, if you will, au naturel.
Yes. You know, I am a Yankee, and that was not easy. We Yankees don't like to admit that we actually have bodies. And to take the clothes off of them was mortifying, even all by myself. But the intention was to strip away the layers of culture that the human covers itself with and really look at it as though it were the flying squirrel. What does this animal do at night? What does it eat? Where does it sleep? How does it behave?
And it is a marvelous, this first chapter, a survey of the human body from head to toe, with many side trips and many inside trips.
Yeah.
Because you get fascinated at certain points, and whoa. One of the most intriguing of those points, in my opinion, is our ability, humans, to run for long periods of time.
Yeah, that was news to me. The human animal is an elite runner, evolved to run not fastest, because there are a few faster animals, but longest. A human can outlast a horse, and I had no idea that was the case. But there are still people in the world who hunt animals by outrunning them, even things like gazelles that are super fast. The humans can run longer, and so they run and the gazelle outruns them. But then the gazelle has to rest. This gives the human time to catch up and make the gazelle run again, and they'll run an animal to exhaustion and catch it by hand.
Now, the other interesting thing about this business of running is where you start the discussion. You start the discussion with a disquisition on your knee, which you don't, describe in very pleasing terms. I don't think you're terribly proud of your knee, but I mean, that's okay if that's the way you feel, but you start with the knee.
Yeah, there are a lot of parts of the body that take us a beating in this process of running. We have some extraordinary features that allow us to run. One is the neck. We have this huge ligament in the back of the neck that keeps your head from bobbing up and down. But the knees are not a good part.
The Well-Dressed Ape covers everything. As one critic puts it, the beautiful, the ugly, even the stinky. Even the stinky? Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
The Well-Dressed Ape, A Natural History of Myself by Hannah Holmes. That's our book today. And there's a lot of things that people are saying about this book. Praise the Lord. One of them is in the Kirkus Review, and I think it's so true, I want to share it. Careful science meets good writing. That's what I want you to remember. A pleasure for fans of Lewis Thomas, Natalie Angier, and other interpreters of scientific fact. Now, there are many topics covered in here that you would say probably can't write nicely about that. And one of them is fat. Did you read a bit of what you say about fat?
Okay. Most prosaic is this layer that wraps my hips. This stuff is just a mass of specialized cells called adipocytes, each holding a droplet of oil. When I eat more food than my body can use, it's converted to oil and stowed in an adipocyte. Evidently, I've done this a few times. Then when I eat less than I need, oil is pulled from storage and burned. This stored fat of mine is like a bank account, and for all mammals, there's a minimum below which the balance cannot fall without incurring a penalty. Most members of the warm-blooded crowd need between 4 and 8% body fat on hand to support normal activity and reproduction. I'm probably carrying 30% because I need to have a cookie and think about that. One reason I have so much body fat is that I'm female. A fit human male is about 15% fat, while a female, on whom offspring depend for nourishment, is 23%. I carry even more because cookies are so damn easy to catch.
I didn't realize cookies were that easy to catch.
Oh, it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
But see, that's what to me is so wonderful about the book, that you never leave your sense of humor far off the page, and your humor is very self-deprecating and charming.
Oh, thank you.
And to add that to a lot of scientific stuff is just great.
Well, I think the human lends itself to hilarity. It is a really peculiar animal. It's very hard to take seriously.
Well, Mark Norell, he's the one who gets into stinky. He says Hannah Holmes provides a fantastic synopsis of the human species, the best and the worst, the beautiful and the ugly, even the stinky. And boy, do you go at the stinky. You have a whole section here on something called pheromones. And it's a chemical substance that serves as a stimulant for animals of the same species. One of the other things you argue in here is that most people say that humans do not have pheromones except one, and you're quite sure that's not the case.
Well, what's interesting is that while we can't prove that any one human is leaking a substance that causes another human to have a spontaneous reaction, and that's the definition of a pheromone, we can sniff out a lot of details about each other subconsciously.
I love that word, sniff out. It's so scientific.
Yeah. There's this whole field of research that uses dirty T-shirts. And you get humans to wear T-shirts to bed.
That's called high school.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why they don't bathe, to maximize the impact of their smell. But humans really can sniff out a fair amount of data from a dirty T-shirt.
The human male, I think you say, does have one pheromone, and it's called androstenedione. What is it called?
I'm a writer. I only write these things. I don't say them. Androstenedione or something. I really can't pronounce it.
The human male, you say, leaks this in his sweat, his spit, and his semen. The human female responds by ramping up something called cortisol.
Yeah, cortisol is a basic garden variety stress chemical that sort of gets you ready for an emergency. So it's interesting that when the female smells this substance on a male, her body prepares for sort of fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be that flattering.
I thought it was flattering. Never mind what I thought. And mine was probably in the gutter or something like that. Now, again, the argument that you have about the presence of pheromones, I think is quite good. It's a trickle of evidence, you call it. It keeps whispering that humans can subconsciously sniff out a lot of information from one another's bodies, and that these chemicals do color our perception of one another. Yeah.
And there are some studies that suggest that humans pick mates based on the compatibility of their immune systems. And the only way they could do this is through smell. And that's really pretty remarkable.
Well, there's enough about smell. Enough about smell. We need to move on to Hannah Holmes' own reflections on the Well-Dressed Ape. We'll do that when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast, The Well-Dressed Ape, A Natural History of Myself by Hannah Holmes is our topic for discussion today. It's published by Random House, and an author who's in some interesting books, Amy Sutherland, books like What Shamu Taught Me About Life, Love, and Marriage, has this to say about the well-dressed ape, filled with scads of peculiar facts, I'll say, and intriguing mysteries. The well-dressed ape mates that's interesting the way she did it.
Mm-hmm.
Mates hard-nosed research with lively, funny wordsmithing to produce a refreshing, original look at our own kind. Now, you do something for the reader in this book that I think is so terribly helpful. You conclude with an epilogue. Many books have epilogues, but your epilogue actually tells us something. It reflects or lets us know what your reflection on the whole book is. Would you read that part for us?
Having cranked myself through the biologist's machinery, I see my animal self more clearly. I feel more personally the bond between me and a chimpanzee, and even between me and a fly. Our missions, after all, are identical. Every species is biologically programmed to escape predators and parasites, to gather food, to shelter from the weather, and to reproduce. Although each animal has evolved to meet these challenges in a different way, we are equals in the struggle. In some ways, my animal identity is a great comfort to me. I am still depressed by human warfare, greed, and oppression, but now it's clear to me that these nasty acts are as much a question of biological impulse than of personal scheming. Polar bears, baboons, the wild boar can be just as nasty and for just the same reasons. Somehow, the biological underpinning of human evil makes it easier for me to stomach. Furthermore, the human's great capacity for altruism and kindness shines even more brightly in the natural context. Our species is among the most generous, and it is clearly the most thoughtful. It's that thoughtfulness that continues to alienate me from the rest of nature. My nerdy attention to the human's territorial behavior, diet, and fur color do help me to see where I fit in. But I'm afraid the human brain is always going to make my species stand out. It permits such a wide range of behaviors that there is simply no comparison in the natural world. We are, with regard to our smarts, in a class of one.
The book that you've written, I think, has given you a new view of life, your place in the universe, and that's really wonderful.
It really has been fantastic for me. I have labored for my entire life with the sadness and despair over human cruelty and selfishness and so on, and this has just been a huge eye-opener for me, and a real sort of love affair with my own species.
The first thing that you mentioned this that you feel personally the bond that unites all things, and that's so much what we have to achieve if we're to have a planet left to live on.
Right, and we are perhaps the only animal that can accomplish that. We're the only ones who care enough about other species to actually put our self-interest on the back burner and act in the interest of other species. No other animal can do that. We can.
Now, this one I'm not sure I go along with. Let me read it. Somehow, the biological underpinning of human evil makes it easier for me to stomach. Where are you going?
It makes it easier for me to stomach. It doesn't make it easier to live with.
Okay. All right. And you have a sense of causality that perhaps you didn't have before?
Right. I mean, you see the same actions in a troop of chimpanzees that you do in the human. We have higher standards for the humans because of our big brains and our culture. But we do have the same biology underlying our behavior.
And the same observation makes you see more clearly the wonder of the altruism that the human species also eats.
Absolutely. Right off the coast here, we have killer whales who are eating sea otters. They've just decided they're fabulous. It takes a lot of them to fill you up, but they're great. They do not care, these killer whales, that there are not a lot of sea otters. They will eat them all. They don't care. Humans would care, and that really is unique and amazing.
Your next conclusion or reflection, the human brain is always going to make my species stand out. We are, with regard to smarts, in a class of one. When you write about the brain, you begin that with that old discussion about the bigger the brain, the smarter the species, and then you weave on from there to what a wonderful thing the human brain is.
Yeah, when you look at the animal just as a physical entity, sure, it can run fast, but it really isn't good for much else as a physical creature. And so we use the brain to compensate for our utter lack of weaponry. I mean, look at your claws. That's pathetic.
They really are. Not only that, I need to do my nails. The Well-Dressed Ape is the book. A Natural History of Myself is the subtitle. Hannah Holmes, who's been with us, is the author. And this has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.